Have you ever seen a solution that somehow ends up making the problem even worse? Well, today we're diving into a really fascinating political paradox. It's about what happens when two powerful movements for liberation get combined and accidentally end up reinforcing the very system they're trying to dismantle. The source material for this explainer calls it colonial recursion.
So let's jump right in with the central puzzle, right? Why is it that some attempts to merge these big political theories just backfire? The analysis we're looking at today asks a pretty pointed question. What really happens when you try to blend two of the most important anti-colonial traditions on the planet? And the specific hybrid we're talking about is often called decolonial Marxism. Now, on the surface, this makes a ton of sense. You take the powerful critique of global capitalism from Marxism and unite it with the really profound land-based sovereignty movements from indigenous decolonial thought. I mean, it sounds like a perfect match. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, as it turns out, quite a bit, actually. The author kicks things off by pointing out this recurring issue. Even though this synthesis is born from a genuine desire for solidarity, it often backfires in a very, very specific way.
And here's the crucial point. This doesn't end up being a merger of equals. The paper argues that in these kinds of hybrid theories, decolonial ideas are often treated as just content, like interesting examples or data points that get plugged into a pre-existing Marxist structure. So it's not a new framework, it's more like an old one with a new coat of paint.
To really get why this happens, we have to understand that these two worldviews are not just different sets of political opinions. No, they operate on fundamentally different logics about how the world even works, what a person is, and what the future is supposed to look like. We're talking about two different worlds.
Okay, this slide gets to the absolute heart of it, this core contrast. Marxism, at its very foundation, is a universalist project. It's searching for a single, total explanation for history that applies to everyone everywhere. You have the universal class, a single revolutionary path forward. But decolonial thought, it's pluriversal. It starts with the idea that there are many worlds, many ways of being, many valid histories, a pluriverse, if you will.
And this table just lays out how deep those differences run. I mean, look at this. Marxism sees the political subject as the universal class, defined by its role in production. For decolonial thought, it's about distinct peoples, defined by kinship and relationships. Marxism sees space as a map, right? Administrative, Cartesian. Decolonial thought sees it as relational, embodied. And time? For Marxism, it's a straight line, always moving forward towards revolution. For many indigenous cosmologies, it's cyclical, it's regenerative, it's tied to the land.
So, because of these deep, fundamental differences, the author puts forward this really powerful idea. A universal system, just by its very nature, can't coexist with a pluriversal one inside the same theoretical house. It doesn't make room for it, it absorbs it. The universal framework will always try to translate and flatten and ultimately control the pluriversal one.
So let's move on and look at the nitty-gritty of how this colonial recursion, this pattern of repeating colonial logic, actually works in practice. The author points out several specific ways this all plays out.
Now, this part is absolutely key. This isn't about bad intentions. The author argues it's not an ideological mistake, it's an architectural one. Think about it like software. The universal framework, in this case Marxism, acts like the computer's operating system. It sets all the rules. The pluriversal framework, decolonial thought, is like an app that has to run on that system. The operating system will always determine what the app can and cannot do.
And here are the really concrete ways that overwriting process happens. At the level of knowledge, what the author calls epistemic, indigenous knowledge gets treated like a raw material, a resource to be mined from Marxist theory. At the level of being, or ontologically, the concept of a distinct people gets translated into the economic category of class. And organizationally, indigenous models of consensus are often pushed aside for a more hierarchical, centralized party structure. You see, it happens at every single level.
This pattern is so predictable, so baked into the very architecture of this synthesis, that the author actually formalizes it into a full-blown theory.
And this gets us to the absolute core of the paper's argument, the recursion theorem. It's a theory designed to explain why a universal framework, when you try to merge it with a pluriversal one, will almost inevitably colonize it, no matter how good everyone's intentions are.
So how does it work? Well, the theorem unfolds in 4 stages. First, the universal system sets itself up as the host, which means it gets to set the terms of the debate. Second, it starts translating everything. All these pluriversal ideas get recoded into its own language. Peoplehood becomes class, relationality becomes a resource. Third, it flattens out all those deep, irreducible differences, making them fit neatly into its own categories. And finally, it captures the very idea of the future, making its own revolutionary goal the one and only possible destination for everybody.
And here's the formal statement of that theorem. The big takeaway here is that this is a matter of structural inevitability, not some personal or ideological mistake. When you try to fit a system based on multiplicity inside a system based on singularity, the singular system is pretty much always going to win by default.
Okay, so we've gone through all this, the frameworks, the cosmologies, the theorems, the whole shebang. So what's the bottom line? What are we supposed to do with all this information? The paper's conclusion is pretty stark, but it's also very clear. If decolonial thought is going to maintain its integrity and its power, it can't just be a modifier. It can't be decolonial Marxism or decolonial anything else. It has to be treated as its own complete, sovereign political world, with its own logic, its own future, and its own terms for engaging with others. And that leaves us with a really provocative and honestly, a really difficult final question. If this theory of recursion is right, it challenges our whole idea of what solidarity can be. How can different movements, different worlds, work together and support each other against common enemies, without the larger, more universal one inevitably absorbing and erasing the other? Now that's a question that goes way beyond any single theory.